guys, this is Ozone here. Today's topic is going to be the first console that we're going to be covering, the Atari 2600. You see, the Atari 2600 was actually very revolutionary for its time. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't the first video game console or anything, but what it did brought consoles kind of back into the mainstream. I mean, don't get me wrong, you had your Magnavox Odysseys and your Fairchild Channel F systems, but the Atari 2600 is really where many people call the golden age of video games to really kind of hit its stride. But how did it come to be? What context was it made in, and does it even still hold up today? These are the questions we'll be answering on this episode. But first, we need a history lesson. I know, but it's important. We gotta kind of get some context. So, let's set the stage. I said, let's set the stage.
Ah, there we go, much better. So, let's get started. In 1972, two people named Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney formed Atari Incorporated. Their first major product was Pong. Yes, the first ever coin-operated arcade game. Well, the first successful one at least. Yes, people, that game that featured two rectangles and a square ball was their very first massive hit. However, 3 years later, they were already entering the console scene. By 1975, they were competing with their main competitor, Magnavox, and their Magnavox Odyssey by releasing a Pong console. It had one whole game on it. Can you guess what it is? It's Pong. Alright, now jumping to September of 1975, we go to MOS Technology with the 6502 microprocessor. Costing a whole $25, it could do some pretty advanced stuff. And that caught the eye of Cyan Engineering, who Atari had acquired a year prior. Together, Cyan and MOS decided to develop a console using the microprocessor. The prototype of this console was shown, and it could do some pretty cool stuff, including running Atari's very own tank game created by their own subsidiary, Key Games. And so, as part of this little deal to acquire the technology, Atari wanted a second set of the microprocessors. And so, codenamed Stella in development, in 1977, September to be exact, Atari released the Video Computer System. Wait, it's not called the 2600? Yes, it's actually not called the 2600 at launch. Huh, well that's interesting. Actually, as a matter of fact, the 2600 name didn't come out until 1982 when Atari released the Atari 5200 game console. And so to kind of standardize things, because they named their console the 5200, they thought, why don't we just have that number? Boom, 2600.
Oh man, those new transitions really give you a workout. Now where was I again? Oh yeah, the Atari 2600. So now you know the history, but what about the console itself? Well, we must turn to the console shelf. Where is it? There it is.
So, here's the Atari 2600. For some reason, every console back in the 1970s always had this wood panel finish. Also, what's up with this grill design? Am I supposed to be playing video games on this thing or cooking burgers? On top of the console, you have your power on and off switch and a color black and white TV switch. Because yes, at this time, color TVs were still a luxury back then. After the cartridge slot, you have your game select and your game reset switch. The game select switch I'll get into a little bit later, as that actually is based off a game-by-game basis. Whereas the game reset switch, well, resets the console, it's kind of in the name. Moving on over to the back side of the console, we have your left and right controller port. You have two difficulty switches, expert and novice, for each player. You have your channel 2 or 3 switch, and of course you have your power jack for, well, power. This channel 2 or 3 switch is actually related to the channels on your TV. I'm assuming Atari made this switch in case you had another device plugged in that runs on another channel. Also, an interesting side note about this console, you may notice this while you're here, this is actually the video connector wire to plug into the TV, but it's hardwired into the console. Again, another interesting quirk about video game consoles from the 1970s.
So you're probably wondering, for the console this old, what kind of connection does it use to hook up to your TV? Certainly not HDMI, or certainly not components, so it's gonna be those good old composite video cables, you know, the red, yellow, and white. Nope! Yeah. You thought this console was advanced enough to have composite cables? Nope. That's right. In order to plug in your Atari 2600, it uses RF. Now, for those who don't know, RF is actually quite simple. Basically, it plugs into the antenna port on the back of your TV. And the way you would do it is with one of these. A switch box. Yes, a switch box. That's all the Atari is. It plugs in with the video connector back here. And then, yes, depending on the amount of ohms. Yes, ohms. You can choose between either this or the pitchfork design. And this is how you would plug in your game console. And you even got the TV game switch right here. Yeah, unfortunately, the way my TV is designed, it doesn't really work with one of these. But there's actually a solution. In fact, this goes with any system with RF. All you gotta do is buy one of these. You can buy them from your local electronics store for like $3. You screw that into the back of your TV, and then you plug the antenna cable. There, problem solved. No more need for that switch box. So, let's get playing. But first, we need to get our controller. Well, here it is. This is the controller. I mean, come on, just look at it. A joystick, one whole button, and people in 1977 had it made. I will say that nowadays, this controller's joystick is just a little bit stiff. Like his beige. And the button is just a little springy. But, honestly, it's not that bad. For 1977 standards, I mean, it did its job, and I'm not gonna lie, it can feel comfortable in the hands. In terms of the way you connect it, it's with this right here. If this connector kind of looks familiar, it's actually the same connector you'd use for a Sega Genesis controller. So yeah, if you got a Sega Genesis controller, you can use that to play your Atari system instead. Pretty cool. Well, we just got the Atari set up, but now we gotta pick a game. Let's go back and see what we have.
Yes, the Atari 2600 cartridge designs. They're usually a pretty uniform design, except for third-party companies such as Coleco or Activision.
Alright, I think we're about ready to play some Atari. What should we start with? Well, we're going to start with Combat. Now, this was a very important game for the system. You see, this was the pack-in title, so this was, for a lot of people, their first exposure to what the power of the 2600 could really do. So, let's check it out. I mean, wow. Yep, that's what the Atari 600 graphics look like. Man, I can't wait to start playing. Huh. I'm pressing every button. I mean, there's only one button to press, but... Oh, that's right.
You have to hit the reset button before you can even start playing the game. Most Atari games, for that matter.
There we go. Now we can start playing Atari.
Thankfully, Combat's controls are actually relatively simple. You just use the joystick to move, and you use the button to fire. Your goal is simple: shoot the other tank as much as you can. Although, if you notice, the other tank isn't moving. Because this is actually a two-player only game. Yeah, 2 players only. They decided to make their packing title only 2 players. So, you can't even play this game by yourself unless you just want to shoot a non-moving tank all day long.
That's it? That's all there is? I just thought, with the pack-in title there'd be a little bit more variety. Oh, that's right. I forgot about that game select switch.
Yes, by hitting the game select switch, you notice that the layout, and sometimes even the vehicles that you use in the game, completely change. Yes, before you had main menus in video games, this is how you would switch what type of game mode you want to play. One thing that the Atari 2600 was really known for was its arcade ports. Like this one, Asteroids. The gameplay for Asteroids is really quite simple. You have a ship and you have asteroids. The goal is to clear the asteroids off the screen and, of course, rack up the points. The joystick moves your ship and the fire button fires at the asteroids. When you shoot the asteroids, smaller ones may pop out and you have to shoot those as well. There's also a good time to point out that the joystick on the Atari 2600 controller is a bit stiff. Moving your ship can feel kind of rigid sometimes, and it can be kind of hard to line up a shot. Oftentimes, it's so stiff that you end up getting hit and losing a life. But overall, a fairly entertaining game. Next up is Space Invaders, based off the classic arcade game by Taito. Invaders drop down from the sky, and your job is to shoot them down with your laser cannon. At least that's what the instruction book calls it. Before they either hit the bottom of the screen, or they hit you 3 times with their laser cannon. You have 3 points for cover, and you can use them to defend against the aliens, although the aliens can shoot them down. One thing that I noticed is that the aliens keep getting faster and faster as the game progresses, to the point where you're just dodging all these laser barrages at the same time. It really is quite exhilarating, and it definitely keeps up the pace. But overall, this is a very fun and addicting game. There's a reason why people call this one of the most classic arcade games. Next up is, oh boy, Pac-Man. One of the most infamous games on the console, and is said to be one of the culprits of the 1983 video game crash. As far as gameplay, well, it's Pac-Man. You go around eating the dots and avoiding the ghosts, but if you eat the power pellets, or the blinking dots, you can now eat the ghosts. How do I put this? The game barely resembles the original. Pac-Man doesn't even turn up when he's going up on the screen. The sound effects are primitive, and overall it's just kind of unpleasant. I heard this game was just a prototype that was published, and based off what I've played, I can see why. I guess there's some enjoyment in some of the gameplay, but overall, it's a bit rough. Donkey Kong. Yes, the Nintendo arcade game, but it was actually published by Coleco. Well, it's Donkey Kong. You're running up the construction site as Mario, trying to rescue Pauline from the evil Donkey Kong while jumping over barrels. Like Pac-Man, I feel like this port had some corners cut. I mean, first of all, I understand it's Atari graphics, but the barrels straight up look like chocolate chip cookies. Also, this port only has 2 stages from the arcade game. The main barrel stage and the final stage where you're dodging the fireballs. It's missing 2 of the arcade game stages, the Pie Factory and the elevator stage. Look, I understand this is Atari and they need to cut measures. That I can understand. But I don't know, the game just feels partially incomplete without it. I think the more weird thing is the fact that I'm playing as Mario on an Atari console. That is interesting. So like Pac-Man, there is some fun to be had with the gameplay from time to time, but once again, it's a bit of a primitive port. The last game that I want to cover is Super Breakout. Now this game is interesting because it uses the Atari paddle controller. It has a button on the side, but of course it has this knob that you turn, which is how you control the game. That itself is already strange. But what's even more strange is the fact that the controllers are daisy-chained together. I'm not joking, you have 2 controllers, but they all lead to the same wire. That's weird. Now in terms of how the game is controlled, you can see that my paddle is really flickering a lot when I'm using the controller. I'm assuming because of the technology that was used and how it's aged, you get this jittery movement when you play the game. But the game itself is actually quite fun. You're bouncing this ball against the wall and your goal is to clear all the blocks. It's addicting, kind of like Space Invaders, but the jittery controls make it a little frustrating to play.
You know, doing this episode on the Atari 2600 has given me a newfound respect for the history of gaming. Sure, there are some parts of it that are definitely kind of, outdated. But everything's gotta start somewhere, and I'm glad it started right here with the Atari 2600. Until next time, this is Ozone. See you guys later.